Millionaire abandoned his pregnant ex. She returned with his triplets at his wedding. Welcome, everyone, to today's gripping tale of love, betrayal, and ultimate redemption. Our story unfolds against the backdrop of high society, lavish living, and hidden secrets that refuse to remain buried forever. In Millionaire abandoned his pregnant ex, she returned with his triplets at his wedding. You'll witness a sequence of heart-racing events that unravel in the most spectacular fashion possible. Expect shocking twists at every turn, a dash of divine retribution, and a lesson about what happens when deceit meets justice. So, settle in and prepare for a roller coaster ride of heartbreak, drama, and a reckoning that arrives when it's least expected. Before we dive in, if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. If you're excited about this story, let us know. If you enjoyed the video, press 1. If not, press O. Your feedback really inspires me to gather more uplifting and meaningful stories. Brandon Hayes was a man who radiated success and confidence. At just 34 years old, he had accomplished more than most people twice his age. He owned a string of prestigious real estate developments dotted around the city, stood at the helm of a booming tech startup, and held investments in everything from organic grocery chains to boutique clothing brands. He was not a mere millionaire, he was well on his way to becoming a billionaire if his projections and those of his advisors held true. Still, for all his business acumen and outward charm, there was something about Brandon that people quietly whispered about, his determination to have whatever he wanted, when he wanted it. He carried an aura that said, "I succeed at all costs." Failure, to him, was not an option. Rumors floated about how he closed deals or ended partnerships the moment he sensed the slightest disadvantage. If Brandon's business style was abrupt, so was his approach to personal relationships. He treated them like transactions, always charting out exit strategies if the emotional ledger showed a deficit. One evening, 2 years earlier, he had hosted a gala at the Ritz-Carlton, celebrating his triumphant real estate deal in Dubai. It was there he reconnected with Alicia Roberts, a woman he had dated casually in college. Back then, Alicia had been the spirited journalism major who wore her heart on her sleeve. Although their college relationship was fleeting, it had ended amicably, with both pledging to remain good friends. Yet, time and distance had severed that connection. They had rarely spoken since graduation, but on that fateful night at the Ritz-Carlton, sparks flew anew. Alicia, who had matured into a poised professional journalist, was there on assignment for a lifestyle magazine. She had been sent to cover Brandon's influential role in revitalizing a once declining urban landscape. Brandon, sweeping from table to table, paused when he saw Alicia, and driven by a wave of nostalgia, struck up a conversation. He effortlessly turned on his charm, and Alicia found herself dazzled. They decided to meet for coffee a few days later to discuss the article she was writing. One coffee date turned into 2, then dinner. Before long, they found themselves reminiscing about old times, rediscovering each other's quirks and jokes. They began dating in earnest, a whirlwind of fancy restaurants, spontaneous overseas trips, and glamorous social events. Alicia always seemed slightly out of place in Brandon's world of sharp suits and expensive wines, but she was enthralled by his drive, his passion, and the glimmer of kindness he showed behind his strong facade. That veneer of kindness, however, began to crack when Alicia revealed she was pregnant. The timing, to Brandon, was beyond inconvenient. He was preparing to expand into a new market, finalizing an international project that required his daily, full attention. Fatherhood, though it might add to his carefully curated public image, was hardly something he craved, especially not at that moment. Alicia had the conversation with Brandon one night in his penthouse. She was visibly anxious, her voice trembling as she said, "I'm carrying our child." Expecting relief, or at least guarded excitement, she was stunned to see a flicker of annoyance cross Brandon's face. He had always been diplomatic, but that night his words stung. "Alicia, this isn't the right time." He tried to persuade her that they should wait a few more years. Perhaps she made a mistake with the test. Maybe it was all too soon. But Alicia's tests were conclusive. She was definitely pregnant. Little did they know, she wasn't carrying just one child. But that discovery would come later, too late for the disillusioned Alicia and the self-absorbed Brandon. As the weeks went by, tension replaced the once fervent romance. Brandon insisted on a paternity test. He demanded Alicia keep things quiet so it wouldn't taint his image or distract from his upcoming deals. He even offered her money, generous sums that should have made her life easier in his mind. Alicia was appalled by the cold way he tried to reduce her entire existence to a monetary figure. The final argument came when Alicia suggested they move in together. Brandon refused, and in that unguarded moment, his mask slipped. "I won't have you ruining everything I've built," he snapped. Alicia left, tears streaming down her face. She had never felt so alone or betrayed. A few days later, Brandon's lawyer contacted her. The message was cryptic but clear. Brandon took no responsibility for the pregnancy. If she insisted on having the child, she was on her own, left with heartbreak and an uncertain future. Alicia made the painful decision to pack up and leave the city. She moved to a small coastal town where she had a distant aunt. She had minimal savings of her own, but the warmth and simplicity of the place allowed her to heal from the emotional devastation. It was here she finally discovered she was carrying not just one child, but 3. The news was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. She felt heartbreak over Brandon's cruel abandonment, but found renewed strength in the realization that she would have a trio of babies to love and protect. Time passed, and Alicia's life found a slow but steady rhythm. She took freelance writing assignments, learning to manage her finances carefully. Her aunt helped with the children, who arrived in a flurry of tears and midnight feedings that left Alicia exhausted yet deeply fulfilled. The triplets, 2 boys and a girl, became her reason to fight harder each day. She watched them grow, determined to give them the best chance at a bright future, even without their father's involvement. Meanwhile, Brandon soared to greater heights in the business world. Another year and a half went by, and he found himself unstoppable. More and more people wanted a slice of his success, and more investors poured money into his ventures. Through his social circle, he met Victoria Townsend, the daughter of a hotel magnate. Polished, refined, and well-connected, Victoria was exactly the kind of woman Brandon believed suited his unstoppable empire. Within 6 months, their relationship was plastered across high society columns. Their engagement was announced on the front page of a regional lifestyle magazine, accompanied by glossy photographs of them smiling at a fundraiser. Brandon thought he had finally found the perfect partner to bolster his public image, securing crucial alliances in the hospitality industry. That he had left Alicia, pregnant with his children, no longer stirred any guilt in him, he had convinced himself. She was little more than a fleeting mistake. Perhaps, in his darkest moments, he felt a small pang of regret, but he always managed to bury it beneath new achievements. He promised Victoria the wedding of the century, set to take place in a lavish hall in Manhattan. The location, the luxurious grand ballroom at the Waldorf Astoria. When news of Brandon's wedding to Victoria spread, Alicia found out via a celebrity gossip column while sipping coffee in her small but cozy living room. Seeing his face in the article, smiling and standing next to Victoria in all their glossy perfection, filled her with a complex sadness, a flicker of anger, yes, but also a quiet resignation. She wasn't sure she would ever be truly over Brandon's betrayal. Still, she had her children to consider. Over the last few months, her freelance writing and her aunt's support had allowed her to save a small nest egg. She decided she owed it to the triplets, now nearly 2 years old, to at least confront their father. Part of her wanted to finally demand accountability, if not for herself, then for their children. Another part of her wrestled with hesitation. Did she really want to disrupt the wedding? She pictured the chaos, the scrutiny, the potential heartbreak, but something about the timing felt fated. She realized that if she let Brandon's wedding pass without any acknowledgement of his responsibilities, he'd remain free from the consequences of his actions forever. As the wedding date approached, Alicia made her decision. With trembling resolve, she booked a train ticket to the city. Her aunt promised to accompany her, helping with the children. They would stay in a small hotel near the wedding venue. She had no plan to create a scene. She simply wanted to speak to Brandon privately, reveal the children to him, and ask that he meet them at least once. She had convinced herself that no matter how frightened she felt, closure was worth the risk. On the morning of Brandon's wedding day, chaos reigned at the Waldorf Astoria. Celebrities, socialites, and paparazzi were everywhere, anxious to capture or be part of the most extravagant event of the season. Security was tight, with guards stationed at every entrance to ensure only invited guests could pass. Inside the grand ballroom, florists were arranging endless sprays of imported roses. The staff was polishing the silverware, and the wedding planner rushed around finalizing last-minute details. A small string quartet rehearsed in the corner, and the hush before the ceremony held a kind of electric tension. Brandon stood in front of an ornate mirror, adjusting the cufflinks on his tailored suit. An embossed BH shimmered on the sleeves. He felt a surge of satisfaction. He was about to marry a Townsend. That name alone would open more doors, leading to new business deals and a place in an even higher echelon of society. In the next suite, Victoria was stepping into a flowing designer gown. The Tiffany & Company necklace she wore sparkled under the golden light, a personal gift from Brandon, carefully chosen to display their wealth and exclusivity. Despite the swirl of perfection around him, Brandon felt an odd prickle at the back of his neck. He recalled the day Alicia had told him about her pregnancy, the look of disbelief on her face when he pushed her away. He shook off the memory. Today was his wedding day, and he would not let ghosts spoil his meticulously crafted future. In the lobby, Alicia stood near the entrance with her aunt and the 3 toddlers. Each was dressed neatly, 2 little boys in matching jackets, and their sister in a small white dress with delicate lace trim. The children, restless in the unfamiliar environment, tugged at Alicia's hand and looked around curiously. Alicia's heart thundered in her chest. She was equally anxious and determined. She managed to slip past the first line of security by explaining she had pressing personal business with the groom. The guard, unsure but seeing the children, radioed his superior. A small debate ensued, but eventually, Alicia was allowed through to a side corridor under watchful eyes. She knew once the ceremony began, it would be too late to speak to Brandon privately. But she was running out of time. The corridors felt labyrinthine. She worried about making a scene, which was the last thing she wanted. Or so she told herself. Meanwhile, in a back room, Brandon's best friend and business partner, Adam Sinclair, readied himself to stand beside the groom. Adam always felt uneasy around Brandon's personal life. He knew Brandon's success was built on relentless ambition, but business was one thing, people were another. Adam had a nagging feeling that something was off. The hustle and bustle seemed more intense than usual, and a rumor swirled among the staff that a woman and 3 children had just slipped in, claiming to be connected to the groom. Adam's eyes narrowed. Alicia was the only person he ever knew who might fit that description. But if it were true, it would create a catastrophic scandal. Adam resolved to investigate discreetly, hoping to prevent a fiasco. When he finally located Alicia near the side corridor, anxiety etched across her face. They had met a couple of times back when Alicia was in Brandon's life. Adam had liked her. She was genuine and kind. "Alicia?" he whispered, stepping forward. She turned and recognized Adam immediately. A flicker of hope and dread rose in her. "Adam, I need to speak to Brandon," she said, her voice trembling. The three toddlers clung to Alicia's aunt, glancing around, wide-eyed. Adam's eyes fell to the children, and something in him lurched. It was like seeing multiple mini Brandons with the same sharp cheekbones. "There, Brandons?" Alicia nodded. "Triplets," she said, her voice catching. "He never believed me, didn't want anything to do with it." "But these are his children," Adam exhaled, uncertain. "This is dangerous timing, Alicia. Can't this wait until after the wedding? This will blow everything up." For a moment, Alicia questioned herself. Why had she come? What was she really hoping to achieve? She'd told herself it was for closure, for the children's future, but confronting Brandon on his wedding day? The likelihood of him reacting calmly was almost nil. Still, she looked down at her kids, who gazed up at her with trusting eyes. She owed it to them. "Please, Adam." "I have to see him," Adam considered. He always believed in doing the right thing, or at least trying. "Wait here, let me try to bring him to you." As the organ music swelled in the grand ballroom, the ceremony was about to begin. Rows of guests rose from their seats to watch the bride glide down the aisle. Victoria's designer gown sparkled like a river of diamonds, and she reveled in the attention. Her father stood at her side, proud yet calculating, pleased that the union would merge their two powerful families. A moment before Victoria would step out to the aisle, Adam caught Brandon's arm in a side corridor. "Brandon, you need to come with me immediately." Brandon's eyebrows knitted. "What are you talking about? The ceremony is starting in minutes." Adam, breathless, glanced at the staff, bustling around them. "It's Alicia," he said. "She's here, and she's brought your children." Instantly, Brandon felt as though the floor had vanished under him. Could Alicia truly be here? Did she actually have children, his children? Rage flared. He was certain Alicia had done this deliberately, to destroy his wedding or blackmail him for money. Just as quickly, a wave of panic hit him. The guests were ready, the cameras were rolling. This was to be the pinnacle of his social standing. If news of Alicia's presence and triplets leaked, it might tarnish everything he'd worked for. "Find security," Brandon hissed, face drained of color. "She's not to disturb the ceremony." Adam grabbed Brandon by the lapel, pulling him aside so no one else would overhear. "Listen, Brandon. This is serious. She's not causing a scene. She just wants to talk to you in private for 2 minutes. You owe her that much." Brandon stared, his lips compressed into a thin line. A voice in his head told him to ignore Alicia, to have her escorted out. But something else warred within him, an anxious, guilty part of his conscience that recognized he might not be able to dodge this forever. If those children truly were his, ignoring them today could cause an even bigger scandal tomorrow. This day was meant to be a grand achievement, not a catastrophic fiasco. "Fine," he finally muttered. 2 minutes. Adam led Brandon through the corridors to a small, decorative lounge typically reserved for VIP guests. Alicia stood waiting, the triplets fidgeting around her aunt's legs. When Brandon stepped in, Alicia felt her pulse pound in her temples. He was still handsome, with the same chiseled jaw and impeccably tailored suit, but the kindness she once admired had receded behind the shield of arrogance in his eyes. Brandon's gaze zeroed in on the children. The sight of them, especially the boys with his distinct dark hair, jolted him. He felt a knot twist in his stomach. He swallowed, suddenly unsure of what to say. Alicia broke the silence. I'm not here to ruin your day. She paused, pressing a shaking hand to her chest. These are your children, Brandon. I wanted you to meet them. They deserve to know their father. They're not my children, he snapped, trying to regain control of his emotions. Did you prove this with a test? Her eyes flashed with hurt. No, but you can see they look just like you, she whispered, voice thick. I'm prepared to take a paternity test whenever you want. But deep down, you must realize the truth. The children, sensing the tension, huddled closer. Brandon tried to muster his usual indignation, but he found it increasingly difficult to dismiss the striking resemblance. It was as though he was looking at three small reflections of himself. Adam cleared his throat, stepping in. Brandon, maybe you should do a quick test after the ceremony. We can do a cheek swab to confirm, but the timing, the ages match up, don't they? Brandon bristled. This is my wedding day. I can't have them in here. This is sabotage. He spun to face Alicia, venom creeping into his voice. You've waited until the last possible second just to humiliate me? Tears threatened to spill from Alicia's eyes. I tried to contact you, she said, voice trembling. You ignored me. I didn't want to do this. But you have to take responsibility, and not just financially. If you don't want to be a father, then at least acknowledge them. Brandon's eyes darted to the door, a swirl of dread tightening around him. In the corridor, he heard the shift of footfalls, guests moving into the ceremony space. If word got out, who knew what might happen? Already Adam's face displayed conflict and pity. His immediate impulse was to hush this up. I'll arrange a test after the honeymoon, he said, almost spitting the words. I'll hire a lawyer, he'll contact you, but get out of here, now. Alicia sagged, shaken but not entirely surprised. She took a deep breath, turned to her aunt and nodded for them to leave. Inside, she told herself she had done her best. The father of her children seemed determined to deny them, even with the evidence of his own eyes. She was about to turn away, when suddenly the door flew open, revealing Victoria, her hair pinned in a flawless updo. She had been waiting at the end of the aisle, wondering what on earth was causing such a delay. Suspecting something was amiss, she'd abandoned the ceremony to find Brandon. Victoria's shocked gaze swept over the group: Alicia, the three toddlers, and Brandon looking cornered. What is going on? She demanded. Her voice was low and dangerous. She quickly took in Alicia's pale face, the children clinging to her aunt. Brandon stammered, at a rare loss for words. A flush of understanding bloomed across Victoria's face. Oh my God. These are your kids, aren't they? It wasn't a question but an accusation. The color drained from her cheeks, her eyes widened with a toxic mixture of rage and horror. This was not in the script for her perfect society wedding. Brandon tried to reassure her. Victoria, it's not what it looks like. We don't even know if they're mine. She's trying to cause trouble. Victoria advanced, and for a moment Alicia feared she'd lash out physically. But the bride only glared at Alicia with utter contempt, then turned on Brandon. You told me you had no messy entanglements, she spat, that you'd never been that serious with anyone. Are you telling me you abandoned a woman and possibly your own children? He reached out, trying to grasp Victoria's arm, but she jerked away. The tension in the room soared to dizzying heights. Alicia half expected someone to burst in with cameras. The children began to cry, startled by the raised voices. Alicia's aunt tried to comfort them. Adam hovered in the background, swallowing his concern, feeling that they were all on the brink of an ugly explosion. Victoria, let's just get through the ceremony, Brandon pleaded. We'll handle all this afterwards. Victoria's expression darkened. You want me to keep going with this charade, stand before our family and friends, and vow to spend my life with you, knowing that you might have lied about everything? Brandon forced a smile, the kind he used in business negotiations to soften a potentially fractious deal. You know how people can show up with claims, he reasoned. We'll let the lawyers settle it. Come on, we've spent months planning. Everything is perfect. Perfect? Victoria repeated, eyes blazing. Is that all that matters to you? At that moment, a cameraman, assigned to film behind-the-scenes wedding footage, innocently drifted past the lounge's open door. Noticing the wedding party locked in a tense scene, he reflexively raised his camera. Sensing a potential story or something dramatic, he zoomed in. It only took Brandon one glance to see the lens pointed in their direction. Anger roared through him. He marched to the door, forcibly shutting it in the cameraman's face. The door, however, refused to latch, and now a throng of curious guests, some with smartphone cameras, began to gather, drawn by the noise. Alicia's stomach sank. She whispered to her aunt, "We have to leave. I don't want the children to be in this chaos." She turned to go, but Brandon, desperate, lunged toward her. He couldn't let this story leak. Couldn't have Alicia vanish without a private settlement. His mind spun with the possible ramifications, each more ruinous than the last. But his movement was too abrupt, and in his haste he slipped on the polished marble floor. He crashed into a side table, knocking an ornate vase to the ground. It shattered, water and flowers sprawling. The noise attracted even more attention. Guests in the hallway gasped at the spectacle. Brandon Hayes, the famously polished millionaire, lying dazed amid shards of porcelain. In an instant of almost divine retribution, as Brandon struggled to stand, the door swung wide and the onlookers glimpsed Alicia, the kids, and Victoria in her wedding gown, face reddened by anger. Cameras flashed. The children, frightened by the commotion, began to wail in earnest. The so-called perfect wedding had become a fiasco broadcast to every guest and staff member present. A hush of shock fell over the corridor, broken only by the children's crying. Seizing the chance, Alicia pushed past the onlookers, helping her aunt usher the toddlers outside. She wouldn't subject them to more chaos. Adam, worried for her safety, followed to make sure no one harassed them. Victoria, humiliated, glared at Brandon. In that moment, she saw his worst side, his manipulative impulses, and his ruthless desire to protect his image at any cost. Their entire relationship flashed in her mind. The lavish gifts, the sweet promises, the carefully curated public appearances. Suddenly, it looked hollow, a facade built to bolster Brandon's empire. Any genuine feelings she had for him were overshadowed by the realization that he might have lied about fathering 3 children. She tore off the Tiffany & Company necklace, flinging it at Brandon's feet. "I won't marry a coward," she hissed. Then she turned and left to face the swarm of gossip-hungry guests, her father storming after her, demanding an explanation. A stunned silence fell inside the lounge. Brandon slumped in a chair, drenched in a mix of frustration and dread. He heard the murmur of guests outside, their shock evolving into hushed speculation. And then, in the midst of that swirling confusion, Adam returned. "Why did you do it?" Adam said gently. "I warned you to handle things differently." Brandon looked up, eyes hollow. "I didn't think she'd come back," he muttered. "And if she did, I thought I could pay her off." Adam's lips parted in disapproval. "That's not how life works. Not everything can be fixed with money." Brandon felt an odd weakness in his limbs, a realization that everything he had built so carefully could collapse in a single day. He'd been so focused on controlling his narrative that he ignored the truth that a father can't simply buy out of his children's lives. He recalled how his own father had never been around much, how that had shaped him. And now, in a cruel twist of fate, he was repeating history, but in an even more heartless way. Meanwhile, the wedding was officially off. Victoria, incensed and unwilling to further degrade herself by walking down the aisle, had marched out of the building. Her guests looked on, whispering, cameras rolling. The Townsend patriarch, furious at the blow to his daughter's reputation, thundered that he would withdraw all potential business partnerships with Brandon's firm. In a blink, alliances shattered like the vase Brandon had knocked over. With the Townsend's influence, rumors swirled that other investors might pull out too. The immediate fallout was swift, a merciless wave of karma that slammed into Brandon's perfect image. A storm of tabloids devoured the gossip. Within hours, social media was awash with footage captured by curious wedding guests. Various headlines splashed across the internet: millionaire abandons ex, triplets crashes wedding, or groom exposed secret family on wedding day. For someone who lived in the public eye, the damage to Brandon's reputation was immense. The next day, as dawn broke over the city, Brandon sat alone in his penthouse, staring at a barrage of messages on his phone. There were texts from furious associates, missed calls from acquaintances who probably wanted to distance themselves from the fiasco, and stern voicemails from attorneys. Victoria refused to speak to him. The Townsend empire was cutting ties. All the might and power Brandon had wielded just a day before now teetered, uncertain. He found himself thinking of Alicia, her tearful eyes, and the children whose faces so distinctly mirrored his own features. For the first time, he felt a pang of shame that wasn't easily buried. He had created this mess, and there was no immediate solution. After hours of pacing, Brandon made a decision. He called Adam, who had remained loyal, though disappointed, through it all. "I need to see Alicia," Brandon said quietly. Adam, sounding resigned, replied, "I think she and the kids are still in town. I'll call her aunt and see if they'll let you meet. But don't expect a warm reception." Brandon swallowed his pride. "I understand." That afternoon, Alicia sat in a modest cafe near their small hotel, the children dozing in a stroller. She felt the weight of the world pressing on her. The spectacle at the wedding still made her cringe with embarrassment. She never intended to cause a scene, but fate had other plans. She also worried about the ramifications for her kids. Would they face gossip or hostility from Brandon's circle? When Brandon entered, the cafe fell silent in her mind. She watched him approach, looking unusually subdued. He wore simple clothes, not his typical power suit. His usually confident stride was hesitant. "Alicia," he greeted, voice husky. "Could we talk?" She nodded warily. For a moment, he said nothing, just sat down across from her, eyes on the toddlers. They stirred slightly, but remained asleep in the stroller. He cleared his throat. "I've lost a lot. The wedding is cancelled, and I never wanted it to go this way. But maybe this is what I deserve." Alicia laced her fingers together, her heart pounding. "What do you want from me?" she asked. She was exhausted and had no patience left for games. Brandon's face was taut. "I want to do right by these children if it's not too late. I'm ready to take that paternity test today if you want, and if they're mine, which I suspect they are, I'll be responsible for them, fully." She studied him, trying to gauge his sincerity. The old Alicia might have melted under the weight of his remorse, but now she was a mother who had spent 2 years raising triplets alone. She had no illusions left. "What about us?" she asked, bitterness creeping into her voice. "Are you going to try to buy me off again, to make the problem vanish?" Brandon shook his head, eyes lowered in genuine remorse. "I'll do whatever it takes to be in their lives, and if you'll allow it, to make amends to you. I know trust isn't something I can buy back, but maybe I can earn a second chance at fatherhood. Even if I never earn a second chance with you." Alicia's throat felt tight. She glanced at the children, at their innocent faces. She knew they deserved a father's presence if he could be a positive influence, but she refused to indulge in daydreams. "Then let's start with the test," she said at last. "If it's positive, you'll need to step up, on my terms, because I won't let them be hurt." Brandon nodded. "I'll arrange it. I'll sign whatever you need. I want to do the right thing." Their conversation ended with an uneasy truce. Later that day, they proceeded to a private lab where DNA samples were taken. Alicia felt her stomach knot the entire time. Brandon's face was grim, as though each swab hammered home the reality of his paternity. While waiting for results, Brandon asked if he could spend time with the children. He took them to a nearby park, watched them totter around the grass with wide-eyed wonder. The girls squealed with delight at a stray pigeon. One of the boys insisted on picking up leaves and bringing them to Brandon. Despite his awkwardness, Brandon found an odd warmth uncurling in his chest. Each smile, each giggle from the triplets tugged at a part of him he never knew existed. This was more fulfilling than any business merger he had orchestrated. 4 days later, the test results confirmed what was plain to see. Brandon Hayes was the father. Alicia's expression upon seeing the final document held a mix of sorrow and relief. Now, the ball was in Brandon's court. He had to figure out how to be a parent, how to support these children not just financially, but emotionally too. His first step was to offer Alicia a place in the city, a comfortable environment for the children. She hesitated, suspicious it was a move to control them again. Brandon insisted it wasn't. Ultimately, Alicia agreed to let him help financially, but she refused to move back under his roof or let him take immediate custody. "You need to show you're committed for the long haul," she said. In the weeks that followed, Brandon's fortune continued to take hits. Victoria's father withdrew major investments, and other associates worried about negative publicity followed suit. Brandon found himself in precarious territory. Yet a strange sense of calm replaced the panic that once seized him at any hint of failure. For the first time, he focused on something beyond money and corporate success, the bond he could form with his children. He began visiting them every weekend in the small coastal town Alicia had called home, working around his shaky business schedule. Alicia was guarded but slowly thawed, especially when she saw how the children lit up whenever Brandon arrived. He read them stories, spent afternoons playing ball, and tried to make up for lost time by being present. It was the hardest and most meaningful challenge he had ever faced. As for Alicia, she busied herself finishing her freelance assignments, though now she saw a potential for more stability if Brandon truly stayed involved. She wasn't naive, she understood the complexities of letting him back in, but something told her he was changing in ways that money had never allowed him to change before. Word soon spread that Brandon Hayes, the once invincible millionaire, had stumbled. And yet, ironically, some in the community developed a new respect for him when they heard he was stepping into fatherhood. The tabloids never got the final scoop. They wanted a tearful confrontation or a dramatic breakdown because Alicia and Brandon managed to handle their new situation privately, aside from the initial explosion at the wedding. One afternoon, months later, as the children scampered around the playground of a humble park, Alicia and Brandon sat on a bench, sipping coffee in a comfortable silence. She turned to him, noticing he looked more at peace than she'd ever seen him. His phone buzzed with business calls, but for once, he let it ring. He was more interested in watching the triplets squeal with excitement on the swings. "Thank you for trying," Alicia said, her voice quiet. "For continuing to show up," Brandon smiled, albeit regret tinged his eyes. "I'm sorry it took so long," he replied. "And I'm sorry I put you through all that pain." She studied his face. "What will you do now?" He shrugged, his expression honest. "I want to rebuild, not just my businesses, but my life, my priorities. This last year showed me that no matter how many millions I made, I was empty. I was running from something." He nodded toward the children. "They're what matters most now." A flicker of warmth lit Alicia's heart. She believed him, at least in that moment. Nothing was guaranteed, but life had taught her that sometimes change only happens in the aftermath of disaster. Brandon's wedding fiasco might have been the humiliating downfall of his carefully curated image, but it was also the start of his transformation, a man forced to confront his failings and embrace a new path. The immediate karma he endured, losing his once precious reputation and alliances, led him to a humbler, more genuine chapter. Alicia rose to check on their children, and Brandon followed, stepping onto the soft grass where 3 toddlers laughed under the midday sun. In their reflection, he saw a better version of himself. And for the first time, he truly understood that real wealth lay in the connections he built and the love he fostered, not in the grand illusions he'd once chased. Thank you for staying with us through the tempest of this dramatic wedding gone wrong and the stirring journey that followed. We've seen how pride and neglect can lead to public disgrace, only for a humble reckoning to become life's greatest teacher. Our story reminds us that money and status can never hide the truth or erase our responsibility to others. If you enjoyed this roller coaster of suspense, betrayal, and redemption, please remember to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue bringing you thrilling tales of triumph and heartbreak. Stay tuned for more stories that provoke reflection and remind us that no secret remains hidden forever.